Hello and welcome to this session on intersectional approaches to inclusive design. This session is for creators. It's for anyone that's constantly striving to create better products and services and ultimately great customer experiences. At AWS, we believe that by bringing diverse voices and viewpoints around the table is how we can create and think bigger and better for our customers and in everything that we create together. It drives innovation, it drives passion, but most importantly, it's when we do our best work. So, how can we be more inclusive? How can we ensure that our own personal biases don't stop us from doing our very best work? That's what we will be discussing here today. My name is Humeera. I work at AWS in the Inclusion, Diversity and Equity team, managing customer engagement. And today I have two really exciting guests for us. So let me first introduce them. Our first guest is a customer. His name is Joshua Kissi, and if you haven't heard of him yet, you will soon. Joshua is an acclaimed photographer, filmmaker, and he also is the co-founder of TONL. TONL is a stock photography platform that really captures images and experiences from different parts of the world and diversity and ultimately stories. And we also have our very own Brian Hammons. Brian Hammons, he is our AWS Senior Solutions Architect, and Brian works with our customers to really engineer in the inclusion process into the design making. So I'd like to start by posing the first question to our customer, Joshua. And I'd like to ask this question to both of you, actually. What drives your personal passion for inclusive design?
I think what drives my personal passion for inclusive design is it really is the importance of everybody feeling kind of heard and seen. When I think about inclusive design, I think about pretty much having a mirror, right? Seeing yourself. And I think there's a lot of spaces and applications that don't necessarily mirror the rest of the world. So that's what inspires me, like not just for myself and my own community, but people I don't know, people that don't look like me as well, to also have that experience and connection to their own identity, be seen, felt, identified, understood. And that happens from a very young age. So a lot of those things inspire me to photograph the way I do, to film the way I do, but as well as think around what does inclusive design look like in everyday life, because sometimes it can feel like this esoteric term, but it really should be as simple and applicable to everyday life as well. For me personally, it started out once I picked up a camera. I understood that representation wasn't exactly equal within the photography market, but it wasn't just the photography market. This applied to all types of industries as well.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and keen to know Brian's point of view as well. Brian, tell me, I know you work with a lot of customers. What drives your passion, and when did you first become aware that you need to be doing something?
Yeah, kind of to echo Joshua's point, it's kind of a journey, right? This is not it was not something I went to school for, and it started really well before my time at AWS. Especially when I was an entrepreneur, it was something that was very important for me to be able to build teams that were diverse, that were representative of the markets that we would serve. Some of my early products were really tailored around bringing like fundamental unique experiences to customers, and makes me actually very happy to work with my customers is that they are fundamentally kind of in the process of trying to promote positive outcomes to the users that they serve. The ones that I've seen really be successful are the ones that take on those types of targeted initiatives to build to use technology as a driving force to build deeper connections with their user base.
I'd like to kind of ask the same question to Joshua, because I know Joshua has many different types of customers. Maybe, Joshua, you could share a little bit about what trends and shifts you're seeing with your customers and what perhaps they're asking you for more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a tonal perspective, when we think about stock photography is pretty dependent on how we're living life, right, in our day to day. And that's being more and more mirrored now than ever before. Before in the past, like stock photography was just kind of like vapid, very theatric, not really grounded in reality. But now a ton of our customers are looking for images that represent, women in the workforce, women in leadership positions, different senses of ableism in leadership positions, and people with different ableism capabilities to be able to speak to various parts of life, various, income brackets of who makes more and who's the boss, and different roles and narratives that we've been kind of conditioned to see. And how do we break that down incrementally and show the improvement, but also the truthful narrative of what's actually out there? A lot of people now are looking for imagery that are dependent and feel more humanistic. When I say humanistic, I mean relative to like social media, right? Because we're on our phones all day, right? We're on social media all day. So like a lot of the imagery that we click to, a lot of the imagery that we like and favorite and share, a lot of times feel very humanistic and very relative to like what we see day to day. And people are looking for those types of imagery to kind of have people connect, whether it's consumer facing or internal facing. They just want something that feels more human, that feels more on the beat to what people are actually experiencing. So a lot of our customers are asking us for images like that.
And that's interesting. I know that there's a real intersect there with technology, also in terms of the technology images that you host on Tonal. Can you give me some examples just to bring it to life a little bit, like one or two of your customers? Like what are they asking for and what have you created for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to technology driven images, a lot of technology driven images are seen from a certain perspective, which are mostly male. And right on top of that layer, mostly white male. And if not that, I think a lot of people associate technology with that demographic. And what we try to do is show this diverse and nuanced and very kind of varied perspective when it comes to technology, right? Like grandma is definitely using her iPad, you know what I mean? And somebody at the barbershop is also using a sense of technology to check in customers. So it's like really showing how technology applies when it's not Silicon Valley, it's not high tech, but it's like the technology that people use day to day that may not be championed or may not be what we spotlight, but showing that sense of everyday heroism within these products and how they use it, whether it's connectivity to family, whether it's connectivity for business, or just general pleasure and leisure time, right? So those are different areas that people are looking for now and kind of have represent within imagery. So it's kind of our job to provide that, but as well as kind of look to the future of like what is also happening that's going to also change the narrative when it comes to how people of color, minority groups, underrepresented populations interact with technology, because it feels like we're not necessarily in the spaces of technology unless you're talking about like tokenism, right? There's only one or a few or things like that. So I think from an overall perspective, we're kind of looking to remold what technology looks like, because it's not necessarily always for the privileged, right? And just showing this varied perspective of what that looks like in many different lives, right? It's been super important for us at Tonal.
I can imagine. I think it's a real equalizer, isn't it? It really helps democratize how we take these messages out. So that's really interesting. And I know you work with some pretty interesting brands. So let me. I think you've done some work with Nike and with some others. So you work right across multiple industries, don't you?
Yes, yeah, we worked with Nike, we worked with other companies as well that were really like, hey, like we believe in what Tonal believes in. We believe in that imagery should be diverse, it should be applicable to many different people. And when it comes to something like our partnerships with Nike, a lot of them are in a position of showing women in leadership positions within sport. Highlighting women within sport has been really important for Nike, and they've probably invested into that marketing cycle maybe 10 years ago, and they're seeing the reap of those benefits now when it comes to the US team, for the soccer team, when it comes to like women in tennis, like when it comes to, like, for a lot of times people just thought sports was a male dominant market and that's the only marketing that we needed. But I think they did a really good job, especially tapping Tonal, to be like, hey, we want to show these organic, authentic perspectives when it comes to sport and women, and we want to kind of have that be a conversation. Like, how do we do that without it feeling like an ad campaign, right? It's not necessarily buy these sneakers, buy this shirt, buy this hoodie. It's more so like, who do you get to connect to in this way where we amplify a local voice, an athlete, a person aspiring to be an athlete, or just an everyday woman that just has, loves to run or loves to jog, and show that perspective. So I think from athletic brands to technologically brands, like we're in a space where we're just showing what it looks like for diversity to be applied to everyday life, right? So for us, we've been really, really grateful for those opportunities with Nike and Foot Locker. And one of the Foot Locker campaigns we did was around a young man who had albinism, right? And his whole dream was to be on TV. Like it was just that simple. He was like, hey, I have albinism and I've never seen a ton of people on TV or media that look like me, right? So we highlighted and also shown his narrative and had him write a story about it, but as well as did a photo shoot. And as well, it was not anything to do about being cool with sports, but more so the humanity of it all. And I think now a lot of brands and clients are coming to the space where it's just like they just want to show a sense of humanity within their work and less product driven. Like, hey, buy this, see this. Like they have those ads out there already, right? But how do we change up and think around how do you connect with people in the everyday world? Is to kind of think different about how we tell those stories.
Wow, I really like that story. That's really inspiring. And actually, on that point of humanity, Brian, I have a question for you, because I know a lot of the work you've been doing has been really about surfacing the humanity that Joshua was just talking about. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what that means to you.
Yeah, and and to kind of talk through, and it's interesting because in a way I'm kind of born into this this humanistic role of tech being an enabler, right? Like just from my own personal history, it was my only outlet that allowed me to kind of pull the world a little bit closer. To kind of look and think beyond what my circumstances were. So this is also why it's very important for me to think about ways to one, keep thinking about how to put this into the hands of folks through STEM and then other types of ways of making it approachable. But then I also, and this is kind of speaking to Joshua's concept of collaboration, is, this provides us an opportunity to really work together, hand in hand to build better products, right? So, and actually a really good example of this one was some of the work that I was doing with Pinterest. So, at least, in a couple of ways, they've taken pretty good. They've done a really good job of really re-architecting some of their entire platforms around, the way that they're building in inclusivity into their search, right? But another product or project that I was able to directly collaborate with them on was a project called Fine Grain Access Control. And this was something that took about a year and a half in collaboration between AWS and Pinterest. But one of the first use cases for it was allowing users on their platform teams to amplify the content of underrepresented contributors. So they were able to kind of self-identify these groups as being underrepresented, and then they were actually now able to kind of create a space on the platform in which to highlight their works, right? So that actually is a very good example of where this merger of inclusive design and technology really come together. But it's not without work. It takes a lot of engineering work to make it happen. But part of the effort is in the ability to, again, form meaningful connections with your users and to create positive outcomes for them. And this is one of those examples of a positive outcome that they were able to do for folks that were really need that type of representation on that platform.
So Brian, it sounds like Pinterest has really increased representation through this project and programs that you've been working on. I have a question, like, what do you think is a critical ingredient then in a project like that, when you're working on that and you're thinking about framing up how they should approach it? Are there any critical ingredients that you throw in?
Yeah. So for me, and this is kind of just experiential, one of the things that kind of goes a long way is really this concept of intentionality, right? The desire to build these things, the desire to gain deeper connections, the desire to serve the users of your platform better, right? For the customers that I work with, it's very important for them to do that, to make sure that they're doing right by their customers. So, you know, when we're talking about intentionality, when we're talking about saying, I want to be the best in search, for instance, well, the best in search is broad, but we can kind of start with who are the people that are going to be benefiting from your search? Who are your customers? And how are we able to serve their needs, right? How are we best able to serve their needs? And if we can have that conversation in the front of the design process, in those, you know, when we're in these creation stages, we're better able to kind of push to guide to that positive outcome at the tail end, right? It's much harder to change change where a product is landing if it's kind of at the end of the process or an afterthought. And it's actually pretty transparent if from a product creation standpoint, if you are an afterthought in the design process. So one of the best things that I've seen is really being targeted about you know, the different ways that you're going to engage and the different elements that you're going to pull into your product set.
I really like that point about bringing it to the forefront early on in the process as opposed to an afterthought. So thank you for that intentionality. What about you, Joshua? Do you have a critical ingredient, one that you think about in terms of the inclusive design process?
Yeah, I think Brian really mentioned something really powerful that you just mentioned as well, as far as it not being an afterthought, because people do feel that. People do relate to that, and people are unfortunately used to it, right? So there's a clear distinction when a company actually goes in thinking with it first, and you feel that connection, and you feel that kind of, you know, not in a way that doesn't feel like it's not moving towards the future, but something that feels like it should just be the standard, right? Like this shouldn't be an extra, you know, work to do for everybody, but it should just be what's expected, right? But that's a lot of the work that we're thinking of doing. So I do think that intentionality is super important going into any project, you know, that involves people. Like it should be at the forefront of everybody's mind, because like we could always dream up scenarios and have such an imaginative, colorful thinking when it comes to dreaming of things that aren't there, but then you're missing the people that are. So it's like, hey, you have the imagination and talent and creativity to think of so many structures, right? Like for one type of perspective, but missing the majority of people who are kind of missing out on this connection as well. So I think we kind of need to like re-gauge what we think of imagination and creativity to look like, when it's not just reimagining these ladders, these systems, these structures, when a whole group of people, a whole perspective of people haven't been able to connect to it at all. So it's like, why do the extra, you know, imaginative thinking when there's realistic functional thinking that needs to take place? Yeah.
That's really interesting. I heard a great question about looking at the inclusive design process and asking who isn't here, who's not participating, who's not represented, and start from there. So just asking that critical question, because sometimes we just make assumptions.
Yeah. And I think it's normal to make assumptions. Like, you know, whenever I'm eating lunch, I make an assumption that the food is going to be good. I mean, it's just like before you bite it up, you're just going to assume, right? Like, it's really like you just assume so many things about life, but assumption can also be dangerous when you're trying to build something for people outside of yourself, right? Like, this isn't me just biting into an apple assuming it's good. Like, here's me building a practice that not only benefits myself, but so many people that look like me and don't look like me. And that doesn't need to be kind of built on assumption, but needs to be built on accuracy.
And I have a point, just a quick question to ask you, because I know this is really important, and then we'll go on to our closing question. Is that I know for you, Joshua, it's really important to talk about empathy. Can you just encapsulate for us why is empathy so important?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think for the most part, when we think about how you're intentional, right? Like empathy is a very important part before you are intentional about what you're going to do, right? Because you need to understand, you need to connect and be and kind of, you know, just kind of be open, right? But a lot of times, if you're not being open to understanding various perspectives outside of your own, in the privileges we all carry, right? Whether it's cisgender males, whatever it is, like everybody has a layered degree of privilege that they walk around with. So it's understanding that and understanding other people's plight or perspective that you may not always kind of relate to. And I think that's important because essentially, like, that's the type of work that's happening, not, you know, while you're at your desk, but that's the work that's happening at home. That's the work that's happening at the grocery store. That's the work that's happening while you're just kind of living your everyday life. And as I know it, right, like there's a ton of people who are already boggled down by work, by deadlines, by timelines, by like just being so kind of exacerbated by like so much work to do. But at the same time, like this internal work, right, like this empathy, this humanistic perspective of understanding people only helps you understand yourself. And I think that's the important part of it, right? Like before you could be intentional, you kind of have to empathize and also understand what the scenario is or what the perspective is in order for you to get to that place, right? And build those right solutions and structures and programs and ideas of making the world a better place. So I do think it starts there, but that also takes an open heart, or open ear, open mind. And a lot of that isn't just necessarily taught in the highest of academic classes, right? So I'm always asking myself from a humanistic perspective, like, okay, similar to what you just said, Humeera, like who isn't in a room and why, but as well as like doing that extra work that you're not going to get paid for, right? And that's the part of it, right? Like this doesn't come with the bump in your salary. This doesn't come with, this is just more so for the betterment of general society, the betterment of the work you'll be able to produce that'll in turn impact more people, right? So I think that's important to state as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've heard you say before, this isn't about 9 to 5. And that really resonates. I think it resonated with you, Brian, as well, right? This is not 9 to 5.
Yeah, this is not 9 to 5 work. It's definitely it's definitely not 9 to 5 work. It's like 5 to 9 work, or even later than that. Like it's like you gotta keep going. Like you can't necessarily clock out. And I think it's one of those things. It's like for me going into the spaces I go into, I can't necessarily clock out, right? So it's thinking about my life experiences and the things that I'm inspired by. This work is life is work aspect that I carry as an entrepreneur, as a creator, to think around these things, right? So I think it's also borrowing a little bit of that mindset. So like the idea isn't just going to come because you clocked in at your job and you're on Zoom and you're doing your thing, you hit your groove. Like it's going to come in the most unexpected moments, but you also have to be open to it.
Yeah, the minds of creators. Brian, anything to add to that before my final question?
No, actually, I think, and just kind of some of the final thoughts on that and honestly, it's going to parallel a lot of, I think what Joshua was talking about, and it probably speaks to that reality of as you go along these journeys, these are the truths that you kind of see. But, the I&D sometimes is such a broad topic, that, when folks try to take it in and think about the things that they can do, it really does have to think about it in real world responses and think about it incrementally. And between some of the things that we were talking about with working alongside other builders, right? Working alongside customers and partners to build out these experiences. Sometimes there just needs to be help, more targeted help. That's one of the reasons why it's not a 9 to 5, right? Because that type of collaboration doesn't happen within the workday. It takes you engaged and reaching out and being like, hey, let's collaborate on this. So, and those tend to be the things that create some of the most positive outcomes. So, I just to kind of like definitely will kind of resonate, and also this concept of introspection and reflection. It's very important to think about the things that you're doing, the things that you're spending your time and the impact that you're providing. And it's not always easy, right? Sometimes you do want to clock out, but the reality is especially when you get to a place where you have the ability to help folks, like it becomes more of something that you gain energy from, right? To be able to lift someone up, you gain far more energy than you can do by kind of just taking care of yourself. And if you get to that level of introspection and reflection, then I find that that's where you're going to find the most value, and that's where you're going to produce the most value for your customers.
Thank you. That's very well said, and actually a really good segue to my next question. If we're talking about lifting others up and helping them, I know that the audience is watching. We'll have so many different types of audiences, from product designers to leaders to aspiring leaders. I was wondering if we have any parting thoughts, some tips and tricks about how can someone that's watching this video think about how can they help really infuse a little bit of that inclusive design process. Just something helpful that they can take away.
When somebody has a great idea, right? Like, how do we make sure that idea actually gets seen? And a lot of times, because of the bureaucratic side of like corporate structure and who says it and who gets credit and how it's implemented from what team to what team, and a lot of times, at a lot of companies, there's a lot of like internal cannibalization going on where the greatest idea doesn't get to see light because it's not coming from the right person, right? But I think we need to kind of rethink like what's the best idea and how does it actually come to life, because it benefits everybody, right? And it doesn't matter where it comes from, but a lot of the way we kind of operate within corporate structure is that it needs to come from leadership, and it needs to be implemented with a certain amount of plan and kind of lead time and timeline for it to come to life. But I think for me speaking, even from a tonal perspective and even from a creative perspective, a lot of the times the greatest ideas that were able to come into fruition was because people believed in it, right? I had liaisons, I had people that really were championing for it outside of their pay grade, outside of what they were supposed to do. And they just knew this was the right direction, this is the right thing to do. And some people, would risk everything, including their job and their title and whether they get the promotion or not, or whether they didn't stand up or say the thing that they thought was right in that moment. So I also think, there needs to be the structural kind of retransformation kind of happening as well within the corporate environment, that would aid in a better situation, but also a better like palette for us to have overall. Because sometimes that could be really, really hard for people. And it's like, I'm trying, like I have all these ideas, I have the people with me, but at the same time, like they're not coming to fruition. So I'm getting burnt out before I finish the race, right? So if anything, I hope this talk and what we've been able to discuss kind of inspires people to think differently around that, whether you're in leadership or just starting out, to like let the best idea come to light, right? The best idea that would kind of benefit a lot of people and especially underrepresented groups, and let that come to light.
Great tip. So create the space, create the structures, and let the best ideas come through as winning ideas. I really like that. Brian?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's solid. It's interesting. It speaks to a little bit of boldness too, right? And really kind of enabling that type of bold thought to kind of to really provide innovative thoughts, and for me, IND is not something that should technically be bold and innovative. It's something that should kind of just be ingrained with all of us, right? Because it's kind of the reality of our community. So I think it does kind of speak to some of the work that's kind of left to be done to kind of approach it on an institutional level and make it into something that's more achievable. But I do like the concept that there are some institutional blockers that can sometimes get in the way of that type of design process. And then I've also kind of found that again, kind of just speaking in overbroad terms, it also helps to kind of not minimize it, but to bring it closer, right? So that's why I think it was important to give some of the examples that I've given today, is because, well, these are things that have inspired me to think about some of the ways that I can collaborate, some of the ways that I can work with others to provide this type of change. Because in most cases, you'll find that if you ask a few questions, it is high on someone else's list, even amongst the partners and customers that you work within. So, part of kind of reducing some of the friction of being bold is you can kind of be bold a little bit more together, right? And work with others. So trying to get inspiration from things like articles, your peers, some of the things that they're doing within their teams. This is, I'm a rabid reader, so when I'm kind of walking through things that I find cool and interesting in technology, these are the things that really do resonate, because I just see their impact, and they have substantial impact to the communities that they're serving. So
Brian, I think what I'm hearing there as well is inclusion, diversity, and equity isn't just the responsibility of those that have that in their job title, but it can start with anyone with a bold moment, and being able to lead on it. Like, it's really everyone's responsibility.
That's right. For most of the teams that I've kind of talked through today, these were engineering initiatives, right? So these were things that were kicked off from the ground level, mainly because people started asking the question: how do I promote better search? How do I how am I better able to engage with this customer that I haven't been able to reach before? These are just fundamental questions of technology. It comes back to this concept of it to use it as a vehicle to really promote these positive outcomes to your broader community.
Thank you. And just a parting tip that I'd like to share is that when building a product or service, include your ERGs, your affinity groups, and test your ideas out on them. Let's see if they have any perspectives to share. I think that's another great one. So with that, I think we're probably out of time. I'd like to thank both of you. Joshua, thank you for joining us from New York and sharing your expertise. And Brian, thank you so much as well for sharing your customer stories with us today and your top tips. I'm sure our audience really appreciates that. With that, I'd like to wish you both a lot of success with all the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.